Dear Father in heaven, thank you for your word today. Thank you that that word has the ability to help us do what we can't. And it has the ability to subdue and to enlighten our minds. We're thankful that we have this book that has come down through centuries of attempts to destroy it. Thank you that we still have it today. Thank you that we can study it and learn about the unseen God who longs to embrace and surround us and to help us. Father, I pray this morning that you would use the vehicle of the foolishness of preaching to help us to understand your goodness and your ways towards us. Please send the Holy Spirit to be here to help us today. In Jesus' name, amen. We're currently in a series on the minor prophets. We're going to pick that up again this morning. We have already looked at Joel, Amos, and Obadiah. If anybody would, I have those on audio cassette tape. If anybody would like those, I'd be happy to share those with you. As we have found in our study of Joel, Amos, and Obadiah, and of Jonah, who we're going to be studying this morning, we have found a biblical principle that I'd like to open up this sermon with this morning, and that's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11. This principle is something we need to identify and use whenever we study, especially the Old Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11. It says, "Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." So what happened in the Old Testament was written, it had an application in the time in which it was written, but the chief and most especial time in which those Old Testament passages apply is for those living at the end of verse history. Okay? So when we read the history of the Old Testament, it's for us. Now let me give you a case in point. And this is one thing before we get to Jonah. This is something that literally, it makes me shudder. This last week, as I would read through the book of Jeremiah, again and again and again, Jeremiah says, there is wickedness in the government, and there is wickedness in the church. The government is greedy and selfish and betraying its people, and the people in the church are throwing away the law and the spirit of prophecy and the sanctuary and health. And Jeremiah says, because all of those things are happening, you know what's going to happen to the country and the church? It's going to be laid waste. And I go, I don't like to read this. Because the country back then was Israel. But who's the country now? It's America. And who's the church back then? It was ancient Adventism that was rejecting these truths. And what did Jeremiah say? He said it's going to be plowed like a field. So who is Jeremiah talking about today? What church is going to be plowed like a field for rejecting the great truths that God has given to it as a people? Seventh-day Adventism. Unfaithful, apostate Seventh-day Adventism. Folk, it is not going through to the kingdom. It's not. It didn't in Jeremiah's day, and it's not going through today. It's not. God is going to have a faithful few, just as He had in the days of Jeremiah. And those faithful few, their names were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And God is going to take those faithful few and He is going to showcase them to the universe, just as He did in the days of Daniel. But apostate Adventism, just as apostate Judaism, back in the 6th century BC, 6th and 7th centuries, folk, Jerusalem was plowed. And Adventism today will be plowed. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Now all these things happened unto them for in samples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if faithful Seventh-day Adventists are thrown into prison cells and brought before courts to answer for their faith. Don't be surprised. Don't feel sorry. We better be amongst those people. Because if we're not, we're going to be amongst those people who Ezekiel said the destroying weapon is going to slaughter. Do you realize that? You say, Bill, this is the end of the year. I didn't come here to listen to this morning. I thought you were going to talk about new hopes for a new... Folk, you know the hour in which we live, don't you? We talk about we live at the end of time, at the end of Earth's history. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And ominous, incredible events are getting ready to unfold right before our eyes. Right before our eyes, as a Roman Catholic by the name of Tom Ridge, with Homeland Security, seeks to further destroy freedom in America. He's a Roman Catholic. Did you know that? He's a Roman Catholic. America and apostate Adventism are following on a very distinct tracks today. And if you want to read in detail what's going to happen to them, you go back and read the book of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. I know in the book Great Controversy, Ellen White says, fearful. Fearful will be the issue to which all the world will be brought. It's a fearful time. It's a fearful time. But Joel saw all that as we looked several weeks ago. And he said, be glad then, ye children of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God. For He has given you the former rain moderately, and He will cause the former and the latter rain to come down in the first month. So Joel said, yeah, it's a scary time. It is. It's a scary moment in Earth's history. But Joel said, be glad then, because the Holy Spirit's going to be poured out like this world has never seen. I just want to throw in one little thing, and then we're going to go into Jonah. It's an unpredictable time, too. Very unpredictable. And I don't want to sound goofy, and I don't want to sound silly, But I realize that there could be a time when we could come into church on Sabbath morning and maybe one of us isn't here. Now, as dear Nellie said to me one time, she said, Bill, she said, when you keep putting out those behind the door tapes, she said, sometimes I get a little bit concerned, but she said, I realize that you're immortal until God's finished with you. But I want you guys to know, I appreciate all of you. You're dear to my heart. You're my family, church family, and I love you dearly. I love you dearly. I want you guys to always know that. I keep getting these ridiculous phone calls. The children, it didn't come through me yesterday. It came through Marilyn Perez, the lady that was at the piano last Sabbath afternoon. She came to me at the post office yesterday and she said, Bill, I heard this rumor. And I said, oh no, not another one. She said, yeah. She said, what do you mean, not another one? I said, you heard a rumor that I had been killed. She said, how did you know? I said, Marilyn, I've already heard that one. But you know, folks, and as I told her yesterday, I said, you know, Marilyn, I said, those kind of things, I don't care about. I'm just going to go on with life. I enjoy life. I love what I do. I love many, many people who are precious to me. And all of these ridiculous rumors about Bill Hughes being poisoned, they're ridiculous. And I'm just going to go on with life. But you know, I sit back and I say, they've done it to others. So it's not ridiculous. It could happen. But I'm not going to be constantly looking over my shoulder. I'm going to live and enjoy life to its fullest. But we live in a serious time, and the things that we study here, what we talked about this morning about Sam Walton and about Hunt Trucking and Tyson Foods, it's real. It's real. And the Jesuits are real. And what prophecy says in the book of Jeremiah, it's real. And what happened to Israel of old is going to happen to America. And what happened to Adventism of old is going to happen to Adventism that's in apostasy today. It's going to happen because it's real. It's real. And now as we look at this story of Jonah this morning, we say, and are you going to tell me that's real? He was lodged in some great fish's mouth? Yeah, it's real. It really happened. And I think as we study about Jonah this morning, we're going to find some principles as to how God deals with us. Let's read it. Jonah chapter 1. Jonah chapter 1, starting with verses 1 and 2. It says, Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. Now what would you call what God just said to Jonah? It's a direct order. It was a commandment, wasn't it? Jonah, this is what you are to do. Get to it. It was a command. It was a direct command. Have we been given commands? Well, we have the 10 commands, don't we? In Exodus chapter 20. We have other commands in Matthew 28. Go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel. There's another command. So God has given us commands too. Commands. Direct commands. Verse 3 of Jonah chapter 1. It says, "But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare thereof and went down to it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord." What do you call that? Disobedience, rebellion, open rebellion to the commandments of God, wasn't it? God said one thing, Jonah did another. Open rebellion against God. Tarshish, most commentaries and historians say it was in the southern part of Spain. It was way on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. So Jonah was going in the exact opposite direction of the way God said to go. God said, "Go here," and Jonah said, "I'm going here." Open rebellion against God. Now we can apply that to our nation today. We can apply it to Adventism today. Open rebellion. God says, "Go into all the world and preach the three angels' messages." And for the most part, in Seventh-day Adventism, we're going to reunite with our Catholic brothers who are Christians like we are. What's that? What is that? That's rebellion against God. It's rebellion. Or our nation. It says it's all right to have an alternate lifestyle with somebody of your own sexual makeup. What is that? That's rebellion against God, isn't it? Sodom and Gomorrah are no more. Why? Because that's what they said. They said it's all right to have an alternate. What is this alternate lifestyle? That's insanity. That's insanity, isn't it? A nation that slaughters millions of unborn children every year, that's called abortion. No, that's called murder. Thank you, that's murder. But we have a fancy name for it, so that makes it okay in the eyes of heaven. It does? Open rebellion. That's what it is in this nation and amongst God's professed people. Open rebellion. Now, how about in our own lives? Has God said there's something He wants us to give up? And He says, "I'm drawing you to me, but there's something you've got to let go." Now, are we letting it go? Or are we running away? Maybe somebody's sitting out there and saying, "Boy, Bill, I'm sure glad that you can't see what's inside my mind." It doesn't matter if I can or can't, does it? It doesn't say that Jonah fled from the pastor of the church there in Jerusalem. It says he sought to flee from the presence of the Lord. And Jesus said, "I'm with you always, even to the end of the world." So who's here this morning? He is. He knows what's going on in your heart and mind this morning. And He's here. And He wants to draw you to Him. He wants to draw me to Him. And He says, I want you to dump that stuff behind you. Dump it. So Jonah fled, not from his pastor, but from the presence of the Lord. And it's repeated 2 times in that verse. Did you notice that? It says he fled from the presence of the Lord. Can you ever flee from the presence of the Lord? That's impossible. One of my favorite passages, if you look in Psalm 139, notice what Psalms 139 says. Psalms 139. This is what David said. Verse 1, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my down sitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. There's not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's high. I cannot attain to it. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. How many times have you played that game? How many times have I played the game with my children when they were a lot younger, where I'd say, okay, let's play hide and go seek. And so my youngest one, Chantel, would not have time by the time I'd counted to 15 to find a good spot. And so she'd end up right on the couch like this. And I'd say, ready or not, here I come. And I'd look all over. And I'd look all around the couch and I'd say, now where did Chantel go? I can't imagine where she could be. And she'd be going, and then I'd walk away and she'd run and say, free, I'm at the base. When Daddy knew exactly where she was all the time. Wherever we go, God is there. And He loves us still. He loves us still. Who forgiveth all thine iniquities and healeth all thy diseases. As far as the east is from the west, so far hath He removed our transgressions from us. Jonah chapter 1, verse 4. So Jonah's on the run. He's in rebellion. He's running away from God. Now, how did God deal with Jonah's rebellion? Here is the most forgiving, the most compassionate, and loving person in the universe, how does infinite love and infinite forgiveness deal with rebellion? How does he do it? Does he go over and put his arm around rebellion and say, "It's okay, no problem. Everything's going to remain status quo as it was before"? Is that how forgiveness and infinite love deals with rebellion? Does it embrace it and hug it and say, "Everything's okay"? Is that how infinite love deals with open rebellion? How did infinite love deal with Jonah? You know what it says? And I'm going to paraphrase it. It says that infinite love gave him a swat on the backside, doesn't it? It says that he got a swift kick, doesn't it? Jonah chapter 1 and verse 4, it says, "But the Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken." That's what love does? But I thought God forgave Jonah. Is that how forgiving love deals with rebellion? It does not embrace it and say, "Everything's all right." That's not how love deals with rebellion. Love spanks it. Love kicks it. Love does everything it can to get rebellion's attention. Everything. Everything. Love did not fluff up the pillows. Love did not say, "You just keep right on going, Jonah, to Tarshish. I'll make it a smooth sailing ride right into port." It's not what love said. Love didn't give rebellion bright pictures of the future and say, "Jonah, I'm going to give you a new pad right here in Tarshish just for your little rebellious self." It's not what love does it? Forgiveness, unconditional love, cared too much. Cared too much. So much so, verse 5 says, "The mariners were afraid, cried every man to his God, cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it of them." Do you know what we're talking about here? God's attempt to try to reach rebellious Jonah. The whole ship was about to be wiped out. All the things that they were taking from Joppa over to Tarshish to sell, we're talking about a lot of money here. We're talking about other people's lives here. And God said, "I love this man. I love this man. He's precious to me. I'm not going to let him go on into ruin and destruction. If we've got to lose everything on the ship, if people have got to die, I want this man." What did love give to Jonah? Love gave difficulty. Love gave disaster. Love gave consequences for rebellion. And love said, "You know what, Jonah? You've got to take some responsibility here. You are wrong, Jonah. You're in rebellion, Jonah, and I want you to know that. That's what love does. That's love. In our world today, somebody does something wrong. If somebody is living in open sin and rebellion against the law of God, and somebody says, that's wrong. You really shouldn't be doing that. That's not right. Somebody else comes along and says, boy, you're not being very loving. You're not loving at all. Oh, really? According to the book of Jonah, when somebody is living in open sin, to tell them kindly that this is open sin is God's way. That's God's way. Now, verse 6 of the familiar story, the shipmaster came to Jonah, to him, and said to him, "What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy God, if so be that God will think upon us that we perish not." And so then Jonah explained to them that he was a Hebrew, that he was in open rebellion against what God had said, and that the only way to save the ship, the only way to save it, was for Jonah to be thrown into the ocean. The only possible resort. Now, what would have happened if Jonah had not been thrown into the ocean? What's that? The ship and everybody on board probably would have been killed. Would have been completely decimated. Now, what would have happened if God had not sent this storm? If Jonah had been allowed to just carry on with life as though nothing had happened, and the boat just eased into Tarshish, what would have been the resulting thoughts that Jonah would have had? Think about it. What would Jonah have thought if he just moseyed along across the Mediterranean and ended up in Tarshish? This is what Jonah would have thought. Hey, I'm still happy, and so I can live in open disobedience to what God has said, but that's the path to happiness. That's what Jonah would have thought. He would have thought that he can get his own way. And because Jonah could get his own way and do whatever he wanted to do, you know what happens when people get that idea in their minds? You know how they make other people around them feel? If somebody thinks that they can get their own way and everybody else has got to bow, how does everybody else feel? They're miserable. Why? Because the person is selfish. They think that being selfish means they're going to be happy, and everybody else around them becomes their servants. That's what would have happened to Jonah. Jonah would have continued in rebellion if God had not stepped in. Jonah would have perished in sin in Tarshish, and he would have died the second death. That's what would have happened to Jonah if love had not stepped in. Now, how many of us have had a trial or a disappointment or something that has caused us tremendous pain and hurt within ourselves, and we've said, "Oh, Lord, why did you allow this into my life? I thought you loved me." How many of us have ever thought that? Well, you know what? The very reason why that has come in to your life has been because God does love you. And the very thing that is causing you pain is God's method of bringing you to Him. James chapter 1 says, "Count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations." James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. "Count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. And let patience have her perfect work, that you may be complete and entire, wanting nothing." Wanting nothing. God loved Jonah too much to not allow him the opportunity to take responsibility for what he had done. And so what was the result of God's method of infinite love and forgiveness towards this erring man? What was the result? Jonah chapter 2, starting with verse 1. "Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly." What did he do? He prayed. What was Jonah doing before that? He was running. Was he praying? No, because he was in rebellion. And when you're in rebellion, are you praying? No. No. So God's method of afflicting the rebellious is to bring us to a position where we will pray. Where we'll pray. Where we will look up and say, "Lord, I need you. Will you help me?" Jonah wasn't in that position before that, was he? Not until he got a good, swift kick. Verse 2, "And said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord. And he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou heardst my voice." What did Jonah's affliction lead him to do? To pray. To get on his knees. That's right. That's right. Now let me ask you, if God had patted him and said, "Everything's okay, Jonah, just live in sin and you're okay, and your future's going to be bright," would Jonah have ever prayed? No, he wouldn't have needed to. Because he was the center of his universe and everybody was serving him. What did he need to pray for? For So God's method of love, this is love in action right here. It is not love that says, continue to rebel against God, and I'll do whatever I can to make your life as easy as possible. That's not love. That is hate. That's hate for somebody. If we see a loved one in open rebellion and to say, it's okay. Now, if we have a loved one that we know knows that they're in rebellion, well, we don't have to pour it on. We don't have to douse the agony the person's going through by pouring more gasoline on the fire, do we? Jonah learned by affliction. He learned to look up. He learned to pray from affliction. Verse 5, the waters compassed me about even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord. When did Jonah remember the Lord? When everything was a clear sail across the Mediterranean. When he was in trouble. When he was in trouble, he began to pray. Then he remembered the Lord. Did he remember the Lord when he was fleeing from his presence? Of course not. Of course not. Many years ago, a gentleman on a bus going from Napa, California down to San Jose, California, I was talking with a young gentleman about the Sabbath and about various things. And he looked at me and he said, but you weren't there. You weren't there when God made the world. How do you know he made it? And I said, that's easy. The same word that made all of this out here, that same word has power to give me peace today. That same word that did all of these beauties in nature has done great things for me. I know that word lives and it's true. This story of Jonah, people say, what a joke. This guy was in a whale's belly for 3 days. Ha ha. How do you know it's true? Because the same principles that God used to save that man, he's used in my life. Jonah was in a great fish's belly for 3 days. He was there. Verse 9. Jonah said, but I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. Affliction made Jonah thankful. Affliction made Jonah say, I'm a fool. I can't save myself. Salvation comes from God. That's That's what affliction did to Jonah. We're going to stop there for today, and we'll pick up the rest of it next Sabbath. We'll look in Jonah chapters 3 and 4 next week. If you're going through trials today, sometimes we go through trials because we're doing right. Jonah went through trials because he was doing wrong, and God was trying to reach him. Whatever the trial is, and for whatever reason God is granting it to you and or to me, may we, like James, count it all joy. Let's kneel together. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for being so wise. Thank you for knowing just the right methods to use, just the right buttons to push to bring us to our knees. Thank you that you loved Jonah so much, that you allowed bitter experiences. Thank you that you love us so much, and that you answer our prayers, not in ways that we expected them to be answered, but in ways that are best. So, Lord, I pray for myself and all the church family here and those of our precious family that aren't here today. I just pray that you would do what is ever necessary, whatever is necessary for us to see our need. In Jesus' name.